of, maybe just a clip or two. So
No
that's
issue.
all right. I'm a co-host, so I think I can do that.
You can.
Yeah. So I will do that. Acha, in case there are two clips and they needn't come together. So I think I share the screen, then I stop sharing the screen, and when I want the second clip to be played again, then I again start sharing the screen.
Yes,
Is that right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah. So that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All the best, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is 10:04. If everyone is there, can we begin now?
Sure.
Gitika, what do you say?
Hello?
Should we begin now?
Yes, I think so. We can begin now. I have started the recording also.
Professor Lal is there?
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
here.
Sure. Okay. And Mr. Sundu? Mr. Sundu, should we begin? I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are. I'm just checking if Sundu is here.
Yeah.
But he is not a co-host, so he can't unmute himself. So
No,
Geetika takes care of
that should be the case.
Yeah.
Geetika?
Yes, I'm doing that.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm on.
Thank you so much. So should we begin now?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Thank you. So I begin to share my screen. Greetings and a very warm welcome to all the esteemed invited speakers of the inaugural session today. I'm Sangeeta Mittal, the organizing secretary of the conference committee and joint secretary in search and host and chair for today's session. Welcome to all my colleagues across disciplines and universities on joining this session. I extend most cordial felicitations to our collaborators, mentors, and well-wishers from the environment and heritage conscious community that has stood with us through the previous 6 national conferences on on biodiversity and climate change, and this series of national conferences on natural and cultural ecosystem, the inaugural session of the second conference of which we host today. Indebted and grateful indeed to all the invited speakers who have come forward to share their valuable expertise with us. We are delighted to have on board some of the students, participants, and enthusiasts from the previous conference last year on COVID-19, a crisis of human health or planet health, and many new entrants have signed up for the conference this year. And last but not the least, I welcome Team In Search, partners in crime, who always make it more ambitious and that much more difficult each passing year. In Search, initiative to shoulder ecological responsibility and conserving heritage, has been working since 2013 in organizing conferences, green initiatives, visits to places of ecological and historical interest, publications to generate awareness and make positive difference in the area of biodiversity, climate change and protection of tangible and intangible heritage. After conclusion of 6 successful national conferences on biodiversity and climate change, this webinar is the second international webinar series organized by InSearch under the objective of engaging with natural and cultural ecosystems. The first conference in this series on COVID-19 pandemic, a crisis of human health or planet health, drew attention to the fact that though the two might sound different, but they are connected and essentially and integrally the part of the process of climate change. Carrying forward this mission beneath the world's roof, cultural landscapes of Himalayan communities in the subcontinent explores the myriad Himalayan cultural landscapes in terms of ways that various communities have inhabited them and continue to do so, their interaction with the environs, factors that have been seen to work for the habitat and the inhabitants, as well as those that have exacerbated their vulnerabilities. We have formed linkages with eminent thinkers and dedicated crusaders on the way, and this webinar is a testimonial to that. We are joined in its 9 sessions by over 30 scholars, practitioners and activists, all our soul brothers and sisters, in sharing concerns, experiences and interventions they have registered in their unique and meaningful ways. To tell you how this conference was thought, made and put together, and also how we landed no place less but the very roof of the world with this conference, I invite the convener of the conference committee, Dr. Anu Jaydev, to talk about the conference and set up the perspective. Anu, over to you, please.
Thank you, Sangeeta, for this wonderful introduction to the conference. I'm here to talk about the perspective that sort of evolved when we were thinking of the conference. And here I'd like to share my screen, if that's all right. So Sangeeta, I request you to exit your screen so I may share mine. Thank you. Give me just a moment. I'm sorry, I seem to be struggling with this for some reason. Here we are. Right. So once again, I welcome our esteemed panel. I also welcome our colleagues and students and all the friends who are here with us for this particular session. So as the convener of this particular conference, it is up to me to sort of set the perspective on the conference. And this is Neath the World's Roof by way of an introduction from me to the rest of you. So I was thinking about what this conference ultimately means for all of us and why it is important. And the first thing I thought of was the Himalayas. Okay, and this is of course an image of Mount Everest. And at some level, it seemed like a perfectly valid way to begin the conference, to just contemplate the mountain in silence and go ahead with the rest of the program. Of course, I cannot do that because I have a job to do here. So let me just get started with Neath the World's Roof. But before I do that, I need to take care of something which is very crucial to this conference, and that is InSearch. InSearch is a registered non-profit voluntary organization of academicians, researchers, students from a variety of disciplines who collaborate on various projects that center on issues related to natural as well as cultural habitats, and of course, the attendant academic discourses that come with them. InSearch is a truly multidisciplinary collaborative initiative which goes way beyond the cursory interdisciplinary academic referencing that we often resort to. Through allied initiatives like Agrizin and Umang, it participates in community outreach initiatives in real time. InSearch organized its first conference on natural and cultural ecosystems titled COVID-19 Pandemic, a crisis of human health or planet health in June 2020. The webinar had talks by luminaries like Dr. Rajendra Singh, Raman Magsaysay Awardee and Waterman of India, Dr. Gitanjali Chaturvedi, former World Bank senior specialist, Dr. Anupam Joshi, senior environment specialist of the World Bank again, Dr. Erwin Levya, Mr. Hridesh Joshi, Mr. Nitin Sethi, Dr. Fayaz Khudsar, Dr. Kaustubh Sharma, Dr. Raghu Chandawat, etc., etc. And of course, there are names that I might have missed here, but to just take stock of some of the more important names here, let me just go back to this. Professor Sunita Reddy, Professor Asha Juvarkar, Professor Radhesham Sharma, and Professor Murari Prasad. So these were the people who spoke to us in the course of the last webinar that we held on natural and cultural ecosystems. There has been a backdrop to InSearch as such, which has been the Maharaja Agrasen College chapter of InSearch called MacInSearch, which organized 6 national conferences on biodiversity and climate change. In these 6 conferences, we played host to some of the most eminent names from the genre of environmental research and activism, such as Padma Bhushan Shri Chandi Prasad Bhatt, Dr. Rajendra Singh, Shri Manish Sisodia, Professor V. Subramaniam, Shri Nandan Saxena and Kavita Behel, Shri Manoj Mishra, IFS, also convener of Yamuna Ji Abhiyan, Professor V.C. Kalia from IGIB, Dr. Fayaz Khudsar, scientist in charge of Yamuna Biodiversity Park, Dr. Renu Singh, IFS and director of Delhi Zoo, Neel Madhav Panda, national award-winning filmmaker, and Kaustubh Sharma, field biologist, Snow Leopard Trust, to name a few. Now, I would like to sort of set the broad perspective to this conference, and here I would like to talk about the Himalayas per se. This conference is titled "Neath the World's Roof: Cultural Landscapes of Himalayan Communities in the Subcontinent." And this is, as has been stated by Sangeeta, the second InSearch conference on natural and cultural ecosystems. So here I would like to spell out the broad backdrop of the conference and some of the threads that we are likely to look into. The Himalayas are, of course, one of the most significant cultural landscapes on the planet. They're important not only in terms of their mass and extent and biodiversity, but also in terms of what they make possible. They make possible extensive river systems, alluvial plains, deltas, and more that have sustained civilizations through the centuries. Not just that, they nurture half the world's population. And this, of course, is from Stephen Alter's Wild Himalaya, a book that was referenced to me by one of our participants in the conference. So the Himalayas actually nurture half the world's population in India, China, and Eastern Europe. In the case of the subcontinent, the Himalayas don't just stand guarding the northern border, they actively constitute a major chunk of this landmass as it exists and as we know it. The Himalayas, however, are also fragile, not least because of the relentless anthropogenic impact on these mountains. Also, their latitudinal positioning on the Tropic of Cancer renders them extremely vulnerable to climate change. The Tropic of Cancer, after all, has an abundance of deserts, many of which are known to have started out as flourishing habitats. So that in itself is an important point of contemplation for a lot of people who work with the Himalayas as such. The objective of this conference is to explore the Himalayan cultural landscapes and the long-term impact of anthropic intervention on their fragile ecosystems. With increasing intrusions in mountain territories in terms of development on the one hand and conservation on the other, the fragility has never been more pronounced. The threat to the mountains is real, and study after study draws attention to the onslaught of climate change, overpopulation, and unprecedented human activity to the region. The recent havoc of the glacial lake breach in Uttarakhand is a grim reminder of what can happen, given that there are hundreds and thousands of glacial lakes in these mountains. The little country of Bhutan, for instance, has about 3,000 of such lakes, and a breach in some of these lakes is inevitable. So that's one. The other area of focus for our conference will be the diverse communities that inhabit and flourish in them, and the interventions in the collective lives of these communities that have set them on their unique trajectories. Geopolitical interests, economic and commercial imperatives, as well as different kinds of intercultural interface have often led to structural shifts within these spaces. The idea is to explore how various communities have inhabited them and continue to do so. Their interactions with the environs, the factors that have been seen to work for the habitat and the inhabitants, as well as those that exacerbate their vulnerabilities. The topography of the region has, in some ways, enabled certain less accessible and less disturbed communities, like the Ladakhi Balti Dard in the upper northwestern Himalayan region, and the Lepcha Bhutia and Abor and Apatani in the northeast. And these communities, in a certain sense, to a certain degree, have thrived in their splendid isolation. However, while many mountain communities maintain their distinctiveness and relative isolation, many more have been put through melting pots and crucibles from time to time. The very different outcomes for the contiguous territories of Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and of course Tibet present interesting cases in point. Finally, the majesty and mystique of the mountains has yielded a lush lore of interesting cultural narratives that capture the mountains for posterity and make for very interesting readings, and also for very instructive readings. There are timeless narratives in the Himalayas, just as there are the timeless Himalayas in all kinds of narratives. This proverbial roof of the world in many a common lore is guaranteed to shield, replenish, and sustain us forever and ever. But can this be taken for granted? And what happens when the roofs cave? With that question, I come to the end of my introductory note. I thank all of you for being here once again. And that's the end of my bit here. Over to you, Sangeeta. Thank you.
Oh, well, after the turbulent frenzy before the conference, this elaborate and even description of the conference bestows quite a method to the madness. So I do think we are on the right path. Thank you so much, Anu. Thank you for this very even and elaborate description of the conference and its various objectives. Thank you so much. With this, we come to the next phase of the uh, conference. We are privileged and blessed to flag off this conference with a video message from Ms. Namita Gokhale. Namita is a writer, publisher, and festival director, and the author of 20 books, including 10 works of fiction. Her books include Betrayed by Hope, a play on the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Her recent novel, Jaipur Journals, is set against the backdrop of the vibrant Jaipur Literature Festival. Namita Gokhale was conferred the Centenary National Award for Literature by the Assam Sahitya Sabha for the literary contributions as well as her service to the nation in supporting and showcasing literary talents and creating a literary environment in the country. She is the editor of Himalayas, Adventures, Meditations, Life. This comprehensive volume brings together a dazzling range of voices. Though she could not join us as panelists in this conference owing to some constraints, but identifying very closely and passionately with the Himalayas, she has been so very gracious in sending a message for all of us. So with this, I will now play the video message, which Namita has sent for us.
I commend and congratulate this important initiative to have a symposium on the second national conference on the Himalayas. The Himalayas are the crucial lifeline of the subcontinent and indeed of the world. And it is important to understand flora, their fauna, and all the efforts through the generations that have been made to understand these. I deeply look forward to the sessions and wish I was joining you as well. Look forward to the next edition and hope to be there giving my thoughts and getting those of the commendable panel there. Thank you.
Well, we count it an especially auspicious start to the conference as Namita, the indefatigable chronicler of life in Kumaoni Hills, who has based so many of her writings in the Himalayas, including a Himalayan love story, the Book of Shadows and Things to Leave Behind. This sets the tone of the conference by alerting us to the infinite wonders of the Himalayan culture scheme. Before I invite the first speaker for today, Mr. Tenzin Tsundue, I would like to share some information and instructions with our attendees. You are requested to keep yourself muted. Please switch off your video as well. Please post your questions to the Q&A in charge for today, Ms. Anika Kapoor. Please use the chat function to write your questions and please ensure that you post them to the earmarked person only, that is Ms. Anika Kapoor. Please avoid unnecessary chat and do not post it to everyone as it distracts the speakers. The questions and answers will be taken up once both the talks are over, and the link for the feedback form shall be circulated in the chat box towards the end of the session. Please ensure that you fill it up as it is mandatory for certification. I hope the attendees have noted the information and instructions we shall repeat them from time to time for your benefit. And now I have the privilege of introducing the first speaker for today in this inaugural session. Mr. Tenzin Tsundue is a poet, writer, and Tibetan refugee and activist. As of 2019, he has been taken into preventive custody many a times for his activism. When he was 22, he traveled to Tibet. However, he was repatriated to India. He won the first ever Outlook Picador Award for non-fiction in 2001 for his work, My Kind of Exile. He has published 4 books which have been translated into several languages. These include Crossing the Border, Kora, Semshuk, and Sen Goel. Sundu's writings have also appeared in various publications around the world, including the International Pen, Outlook, and the Times of India. In 2002, the Indian edition of the international fashion magazine Elle named him among India's 50 most stylish people, along with Dalai Lama. Tenzin Tsundue joined Friends of Tibet in 1999 and is the current General Secretary. He lives in Dharamshala, Himachal Pradesh, North India. Today, he shall be presenting his perspective on the Tibetan world, landscaping, language, culture, and ecology. We are very privileged, in fact, to have Mr. Tsundue here. We have heard him before, and all the various facets of his personality, they make us very, very eager, in fact, to have him here on the dais or the panel, and we would love to hear you on this topic today. Tibetan world, landscaping, language, culture, and ecology. Over to you, sir. Mr. Tsundue, you may please begin. Am I audible?
Okay, so this is a small offering of music from the Himalayas. My name is Tenzin Tsundue. I'm a Tibetan writer and activist. Just as introduced, I live in Dharamshala, but at the moment I'm traveling, so I'm here in Bangalore. I'm deeply honored that you thought of me to speak right at the beginning in this very important national conference. Tibet is right there at the center of the Himalayas. Tibet is actually the biggest neighboring country for India. It's a country of 2.5 million square kilometers, 25 lakh square kilometers of land, connecting India from Kashmir to Ladakh, Lahore, Spiti, Kinnaur, Kumaon, Garhwal, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, Arunachal, right up to the beginning ranges of Burma. So all across the Himalayas is the Tibetan world. The Tibetan world that once used to run perhaps the biggest military empire at one point of time, at the time when Songtsen, the Tibetan emperor who created the biggest military force in this central part of Asia. So therefore, we get to see remnants of that Tibetan empire in form of languages and cultures, and also people all across the Himalayas. One of the important aspects of pan-Himalayan cultures are the legends and myths, the stories of, for example, Ling Gesar, and which I do not actually get to see much in the South Asian language and culture, but in the Himalayas, from Ladakh to Arunachal, all across, there are stories of the legendary warrior king Lingesa, Arunachal, or in Sikkim. In many places, there are mountains and rocks that enumerate histories of Lingesa. And then in Bhutan, Drupakule, the legendary meditator, 100 who crossed the Himalayas, went to Tibet. And for Tibetans, above Buddha himself, the Tibetans worship Guru Padmasambhava as the guru. He gave them the religion and culture that changed and brought revolutionary change in the life of the Tibetan people there. So when we talk about the roof of the world, it is truly the Tibetan plateau, which stands at 4,000 meters above sea level, the biggest plateau and the highest plateau in the world. And around that, stretches the Himalayan mountains, and in many of the places, it's 6,000 to 7,000 meters above sea level. When among the Tibetan world, we could greet each other by saying Tashi Dele or Jule in Ladakh, Lahore, Spiti. The Portia world in Dharchula area, starting from Almora, Nainital, above, especially the place where Namita ji is from, you would know there's an entire different world out there. So the Himalayan world that we are, that I'm talking so very fond of, do not really feature much in South Asian literature. So therefore, it is so very important to give this focus that it deserves. And therefore, I congratulate this national seminar that is bringing attention to a world that is very often forgotten and ignored, and yet hugely impacted by globalization. The world below the Himalayas, they are the ones who bring in what is called the political authority, developments in the form of industries and dams, bring in military force, both from the Chinese side and also from India side. So therefore, all across the Himalayas, people of the Himalayas are hugely impacted. And most important developments in the last half of the last century is the arrival of the Chinese, who invaded Tibet and occupied Tibet. And therefore, today, the Chinese in Tibet are creating so much of damage and destruction that we see all across the Himalayas, including Nepal and Bhutan are also threatened, and then therefore peace also. So ecologically, when we are worried about climate change, when we are worried about melting glaciers, and because I live in Dharamshala, we see the amount of snow that we used to get so much during winter has literally dwindled. And this year there was hardly any snow in Dharamshala, in Triont, in the Dholadar mountain ranges. We worry that during the summers, there may be shortage of water. And this is not the case only in Himachal region, but globalization that is happening around the world is hugely impacting the Himalayas. So Himalayas, which is the last storehouse of fresh drinking water, where Tibet being the headland for all the important rivers in South Asia and also for China, is drying up. And therefore, very often the Tibetan plateau is called the third pole. You know, we have the two poles, and north and the south, but the Tibetan world, the Himalayas, is a third pole. and we must worry about it because this is directly impacting our lives. The Indus River and Satluj River to the west, Ganga and Yamuna and Brahmaputra basically feed the Indian subcontinent. And then rivers from Tibet flow down into Salween, Mekong, through Burma, Laos, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and entire China. So instead of really being worried about who is politically capturing, we must truly protect the third pole for our own lives because this is directly impacting. I can completely understand the worry people have in Arunachal Pradesh and also in Assam, which are part of the important aspects of the Himalayas in the east. The Wimpas in Arunachal Pradesh, their stories are directly linked to Tibet. At the same time, today they are citizens of India and they have every right to speak about and protect their own, not only language and culture, but about their environment. So this is national seminar that you are doing. I congratulate you. It is bringing important national focus on the Himalayas of its religion and culture, ecology, and of course, politics. You know, it is important to look at it because politics decides who has absolute authority on which parts of the land. So we must not leave that out as dirty. No, this is the one that is truly deciding people's life. As a Tibetan refugee myself, I have lost the right to live in my own country with freedom. My parents escaped from Tibet in 1959, along with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Today, I'm neither Indian nor Tibetan having any rights inside Tibet. I'm a refugee. I'm lost in the Himalayas, and huge number of people are affected by this. So, with this, I will end my little opinion making little points here. So I want to thank the organizers inviting me. I'm able to present some aspects of the Himalayas and also concerns, you know. And one final point is throughout the Himalayas, of course, the body politics and authority that mainstream Indian media and intellectuals have. One solid thing they could do is help people in the Himalayas maintain their language. Language in the Himalayas are dying. And all across the Himalayas, there are so many peoples, languages, cultures, religions, and especially local animistic religions. It is so very important. The mainstream religion and culture are now being enforced on them, and they are losing. People in Lahore speak, they do not speak their traditional language. They now speak either English or Hindi. So these are ways we can, serve them back because the mainstream communities have been taking so much from the Himalayas. Now we can at least help them maintain their religion and culture, and most importantly, their language, especially the younger generation. Thank you so much, Rujana, Tashidele, Julie.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tsundue. And it was so very enlightening for us to listen from you and your vast experience, the pan-Himalayan cultures that extend from Ladakh to Arunachal, and the warehouse, of legends and myths as they are. You are very right, when you say that this geographical area of the world is forgotten and ignored, but it is so very vital and pulsating, with the cultural energy. You reminded us of the Chinese interference in the Tibetan culture scape. And of course, as a denizen of the Himalayas in Dharamsala, you have brought forth the very visible effects, of climate change that are very apparent, to any resident of this area. Of course, we have learned today your perspective, of the Tibetan plateau as the third pole, and the direct impact that this pole, of course, has not only on the geopolitics, but as well as on the environmental ways that it affects all of us. We definitely need to remain conscious of this. And who can not agree with your appeal that you have made, that the media and all the people, of course, conferences like these, the biggest help, in fact, that they can do is to help maintain the very unique and very rare and very valuable languages and religions, of the Himalayan region. Thank you so much. Thanks indeed. Uh, the
बहुत बहुत
questions
धन्यवाद.
the questions are going to be taken after both the talks are over. Please pen down, and post your questions. I request the attendees in the chat section, and address them to Miss Anika Kapoor. We are going to make a note of all of these, and we shall take up the questions. I'm sure you have many. We are going to take them up after both the talks are over. Now we come to two very seasoned and respected scholars, Professor Malashri Lal and Dr. Prem Kumari Srivastava, who shall be in conversation on the topic of Himalayas, a literary journey. Professor Malashri Lal has been my teacher as well as senior in the Department of English, University of Delhi. We have enjoyed innumerable lectures, talks, books, and articles delivered by her. Not just we, the alumni of Delhi University, but throughout the academic and literary world, there's hardly anyone whose knowledge has not been enhanced by her scholarship. We immediately thought of her and Prem as soon as we finalized the concept note, as we knew about their interest in this area, as well as some shared projects that they have done together. We used the good offices of Prem, dear friend and colleague, and a prolific writer and researcher in her own right, to seek consent for this in-conversation session. We are glad and grateful that it has materialized. To formally introduce, Professor Malashri Lal retired as professor in the Department of English and has held senior administrative positions in the same university as Joint Director of the South Campus, Head of the Department of English, and as Director of the Women's Studies and Development Center, University of Delhi. She has written and lectured extensively on women's social cultural positioning and women's writing. Among her 13 books are the most recent works, the co-edited volume Speaking for Myself, Anthology of Asian Women's Writing, In Search of Sita, Revisiting Mythology, both published by Penguin India, and Chamba Achamba, Women's Oral Narratives, Sahitya Academy 2012. She has served as a member of the jury for several literary awards, including the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, London, and is currently a member of the steering committee for the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. Her areas of specialization are women's studies, cultural studies, and Indian literature in English. This talk, Himalayas, a literary journey, the second participant in this talk is Dr. Prem Kumari Srivastava. She is a scholar of many parts, writer, critic, translator, a recipient of several postdoctoral fellowships and awards, with 3 decades of research and teaching experience at IIT Delhi and University of Delhi. She is Associate Professor of English at Maharaja Agrasen College, University of Delhi. With more than 85 research publications to her credit, some of her seminal works are Leslie Fiedler, critic, provocateur, pop culture guru, 3-volume series, Cultures of the Indigenous, India and Beyond, Deterritorializing Diversities, Literature of the Indigenous and Marginalized, and Restoring the Indigenous and the Popular Imaginary, Spiritual Ecology and Sustainability, Practice and Confluence. Revisiting American Culture, as well. Her latest offerings include Indian popular fiction, new genres or new spaces, and tribal literature and oral expressions of India. Her research displays an overarching focus on gender, the popular and the indigenous, American literature, and innovative English language materials. Now, having two stellar scholars like these on our panel, we are all set to embark on this odyssey, Himalayas, a literary journey. Enjoy.
Sangeeta, should I come in first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. So many thanks, dear friends, the organizers and in fact, the makers of InSearch, and organizers of this conference. And in particular, I'd like to mention Sangeeta, Anu, Neeraj, all dear friends, Amit, Geetika, and the entire team of InSearch for having given me this wonderful opportunity to be, of course, to be a part of this gala event, and in particular to be in conversation with a friend, Professor Lal, a mentor, a scholar of many parts, as I said, a scholar par excellence, and to me a true Saheli. Professor Lal, it's my pleasure to be talking to you today. And let's hope that our conversation with each other and the issues and the points taken in this discussion do contribute in a significant way to this session and to the sessions that are to come. So welcome, Professor Lal, to this very, very Maharaja Agrasen College body. But Maharaja Agrasen College is not new to you. You've been a friend of Agrasen for a long, long time. So once again, welcome to this conference and welcome to this event.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Now I know that you don't really need an introduction. You have been introduced so very beautifully by Sangeeta. I would like to, out of your very, very vast and expansive research landscape, and anybody who even thinks and dreams of gender or women's studies would immediately think of Professor Malashri Lal. So within this vast, expansive research landscape of gender studies that has been nurtured on a very, very fertile, soil of, I think, 40 to 45 years or maybe 50 years of, kind of very, very solid toiling and tilling, Himalayan literature and your association with the Himalayas, and Himalayan literature and authors who have dealt with Himalayas, I think that has a very special place in your emotional and literary heart. So, without really beating about the bush, and I know that audience is waiting to hear, from you, your interest in the Himalayas. And the second very important, person who has a, a very, very special place again in your emotional and literary heart is Rabindranath Tagore. So would you like to kind of begin by talking about, say, Rabindranath Tagore and his association with the Himalayas and your takeaways from your research on Rabindranath Tagore? And then maybe, I know you have a lot to talk about. You have dealt with, I know so many authors, Indira Goswami, and your own cultural research on Shimla, where you're Elvin, and so many others. Maybe we'll take them forward, one by one. But right now, if you think it right, would you like to begin with Rabindranath Tagore and your association with the Himalayas?
Thank you very much, Prem. And thank you for bringing me into this very important forum when we are discussing the Himalayas. Sangeeta, thanks for that very generous introduction. And I certainly enjoyed listening to my friend and co-editor Namita Gokhale's message, where she talks about the significance of the Himalayas. And I hope that she will be able to join the conference in another edition, as she said. And also Tenzin's remarks about the need to preserve the language, the culture, the ecology is a very important message. Anu, thank you very much for reminding us about the importance of the Himalayas. And I love the title of your conference, that it is the roof of the world. Well, it is a very large roof. And the best that we can hope to do is perhaps inhabit some tiny little rooms under that roof, which is all that I can claim, Prem. Just a few little rooms under this beautiful roof, a very fragile roof too, as we ought to be conscious about. So, to come directly to your query about Tagore, yes, he holds a rather special and difficult part in my personal history. I am a Bengali by birth, but I have never lived in Bengal. I grew up in Rajasthan, in Jaipur primarily. Nevertheless, the larger family structure being in Calcutta and Shantiniketan, I visited there very often and do keep up with the language, literature, and the culture. So, of course, Tagore is part of that inheritance. But when it comes to the Himalayas, Tagore, as you know, led a very long life, a very productive, creative life, but also tragic in his personal way in many instances. The Himalayas came into his life partly as an inspiration when he was a very young boy and was taken to the mountains by his father so that he could admire the expanse of the beauty and bring his creativity into force. And that indeed worked for Tagore. But many, many years later, and I'm now coming to the time when he was middle aged, he had lost his wife, Mrinalini Devi, and he took two of his children to the Kumau Hills. This is near Rambagh that they set up home. And he brought the motherless children there so that he could nurture them and bring them in a way to Mother Nature. He was very conscious of the fact that if the children could be soothed by the fresh air, the new environment, the inspirational quality of the Himalayan culture, literature, and the people, then they would find some kind of a restitution of the affection that they had lost with their passing of their mother. Now, the Kumau meant a lot to Rabindranath Tagore and Namita, who is a Kumau specialist, and I have talked about it quite often. A lot of the very well-known writers from Kumau actually went to Shantiniketan and had contacts with Tagore. For instance, Gaura Pant, and who's Shivani. So these families did have a link with Calcutta and Shantiniketan and brought that Bengali literature and culture. So Tagore was over and over again drawn towards Kumau, both by the warmth and friendship of the Pant family, but also because of the inspiration that he found there. He made at least 3 visits in his later years, mostly to this area near Ramgarh, but also later to Almora. And some of his important works, particularly the one called Shishu, the child, was composed there. He also wrote some of his very well-known poems, Shejunti, Akash Pradeep, and Nobo Jatok, while he was in the hills. So that by way of a little vignette frame on Tagore's association with Kumau and Almora.
Thank you so much. Time unmute. Yeah. So thank you so much, Professor Lal, for this, for allowing us to enter this one little room, as you said, which is beneath the Himalayas, the roof of this world. We would like to enter many more rooms. So, yeah. So great, I would like to, inform the audience that, Professor Lal and I share, I think, at least a 20-year long relationship and association. And I've been part of several of her projects and projects which are also associated with the Himalayas. We will talk about them a little later. Professor Lal, if I remember correctly, you also, before the Chamba project actually came on board, and we all came on board, and you initiated this fantastic project with Sukrita Paul Kumar, a dear friend, a dear mentor of mine, and both of you set actually and prepared and totally conceptualized the Chamba project. You have also a lot of work on the gazettes and on Shimla and on some kind of a cultural archiving of that. And I know that you've also kind of researched on Elwin's and Indira Goswami's works. So before we actually get into a more detailed discussion on the Chamba project, would you like to talk about that?
Thank you, Prem, for reminding me of some very beautiful moments that I have spent in the Himalayan hills, particularly Shimla and the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, which you also know very well, and many members in the audience. Anu certainly belongs to that period of my life. I knew Anu's father, Professor Jaydev, very well. So the Himalayas from Shimla are very inspiring indeed. Not only do you wake up to that magnificent sight every day, but the culture of the city of Shimla is very cosmopolitan, very rich. And once again, it's the Bengal connection that drew me to one part of Shimla, which is the Himalayan Brahmo Samaj. This was set up in 1886, almost at the same time as the magnificent building of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, which was earlier the Viceregal Lodge, came into existence. And in fact, I discovered the Himalayan Brahmo Samaj because I used to go for walks along the hillside from the institute along the way to the mall. And there is this beautiful estate that I would look upon. And one day I just walked in because it was too attractive. There was an old church. There were some beautiful cottages. And I saw the inscription on the gate, which said the Himalayan Brahmo Samaj. Now, my family belongs to the Brahmo Samaj, 5 generations, right from its inception in the 1830s. That was my great-great-great-grandfather. And we've had a continuous interest in that lineage of Bengali literature. And I knew that Keshav Sen was very closely associated with the creation of the Himalayan Brahmo Samaj. So he was not only a religious and spiritual thinker, but also a very fine writer. As Tenzin was reminding us, religion and spirituality is very significant to our literary expressions. And Prem, you know that very much from your own work. So the Himalayan Brahmo Samaj is actually based on the original contribution of Keshav Sen in the late 19th century. But there were several stalwarts from Punjab who took it forward and contributed to its activity in the community and also to the very rich library that the Samaj has. One of the first of these from Punjab was Lala Kashiram. And this was, again, very, very early when Lala Kashiramji took upon the missionary work that had been started by Keshav Chandra Sen. Now, Lala Kashiram was joined by others who were Punjabis and also Bengalis. So the syncretic conditions that we are thinking about is very important to our discussion of the Himalayas. Though there are small and pristine communities that Tenzin reminded us of, and your concept note also talks about, there are also communities that migrated and moved. And Himachal itself is a very fine example of that. It was originally a part of Punjab and then gradually evolved its own identity. So at that time, when I'm talking of the Samaj in its early years, Lala Kashiram was joined by Lala Ralia Ram, but also by Bengali migrants, intellectuals, you might say, Babu Jodunath Ghosh and Babu Hemchandra Mojumdar. So these were the people who were very active in the Samaj along the early years of the 20th century. And then much, much later, 1960s, and I'm making a big jump, We have a very important person from Punjab again who takes on the work of the Brahmo Samaj in Shimla, and that's Sant Gurdial Malik. And along with him, Sri Lakshmi Chand. Now, these are the people who believed in community service as being a part of literature and culture. And that, I think, is an important aspect of the Himalayas. Somehow there is a conjoining of nature, environment, and human life as one doesn't always find in the plains. And that to me has been the valuable takeaway from my experience of being at the IAAS and my connection with the Himalayan Brahmo Samaj. Right now, the Samaj has been handed over to the Ramakrishna Mission. So, in a wonderful way, the community service is continuing and the library is maintained, a wonderful, rich collection, which is eclectic and mindful of the environment in which it lives.
Wow, thank you, Professor Lal. That was really nice, and at least I have gained a lot of your understanding of and your narration of the Brahmo Samaj, and of course, we have spent such fantastic moments, times, and such fantastic seminars and events at the fabulous IIAS, Shimla. Who can forget that? Yeah. Uh, uh,
I think we should talk about Chamba now because that is the
yes,
detailed
yes,
project that
must,
Suprita, you, I,
so,
and others took up.
so friends in the audience, I would like to just take you back to at least 12 years. It was in 2008 that the phone rang, and it was Professor Lal on the other side. And this was also the time that I was about to step into IIIL South Campus, where Professor Lal was the joint director. And at that time, Professor Dinesh Singh was the director of the South Campus. So, and she mentioned a project. She mentioned a project which was, of course, initiated at Sahitya Academy, but the leaders of the project were Professor Lal and Suprita Paul Kumar, and she said that, Prem, I would like you, and she already knew of my association with these newer religious movements. She herself mentioned that, her family comes from Brahmo Samaj, so I also come from a newer religious movement, that is Radha Swami's, and also the fact that I had association with the northeast, north, the Himachal, and the northern part of the Himalayas. So she said that, Prem, we are organizing a workshop at Patodi Palace, and that is going to be just a kind of a curtain raiser. I'm collecting some scholars from Shimla and from Delhi University and some other parts of the country and of the world. In fact, we had a scholar from Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, and others. And it was a very, very interesting cultural group. They weren't just literary scholars. There was a painter, a very fine painter from Shimla, Him Chatterjee, and several other kinds of, scholars who were dealing with cultural anthropology. And she said, why don't you just join that workshop? And we are going to be there for 2 days and then take a decision. This is the most beautiful part of seasoned and senior scholars like Professor Lal. They never push you into anything. They will always say that take your time, see if you are, if you can, if you, kind of get interested in the project, and then if you wish to take it forward, just join it. So that was just the beginning. I'm not going to take away the initial compulsions and the objectives of the seminar and of this huge project. It was a 3 to 4 year old long project where we visited Chamba, Bharmor, had lovely time. It was a very, very rich kind of an experience that we gathered as researchers. In fact, from literature scholars, we turned into kind of culturalists and cultural scholars and cultural anthropologists, because we were actually we were going into the cultural past of Himachal, of the Gaddi tribe. Our focus was the Gaddi tribe, and the transhuman practices of this tribe. And it was such a fantastic research experience. It was, I think this particular project marks is a significant landmark in my growth story, my research story, because if I can say that my initial research at IIT Delhi, 6 years at IIT Delhi, that research story is a very important research story in my own now career. And if I can say so, 35 years of my own literary journey and scholarly journey, this was a very, very important, kind of landmark. So, Professor Lal, if you could, kind of begin by talking about this project and the objectives and what brought you to this project. How did you conceive this project? I will then pitch in with my takeaways from this fantastic project.
Well, I want to share with all our listeners that this is the book that came as the end product of this journey to Himachal and particularly Chamba, where the main point that we make is that literature is not only the written material. Literature in India, and particularly along the Himalayas, is deeply rooted in the experience and the narratives of ordinary people in out of the way places and the oral communications and the oral inheritance that they have. So the project looked at the elderly women who are repositories of traditional knowledge and culture and stories, the elderly women in two areas, the city of Chamba and the village of Barmor. And we were a core team of about 10 people. And it's delightful to recall that Gulzar Saab was also part of our team. And one of the most beautiful experiences that we all had was to actually get to know Gulzar Saab so closely and to realize what a sensitive, deeply thoughtful, and innovative person he is. In Gulzar Saab's writing, he gave us well, not only a talk at the conference that we had at the conclusion, but he also has that transcribed in our book. He talks about his journey to Bharmor. And when he got there, and almost incognito, he just took one of the local people into confidence and he toured that area. He realized that the older storytelling traditions were being erased and were being taken over by new Hollywood successes and Hollywood music. And Gulzar Saab was very struck with the traditional quality of belief systems, values, poetry, and music. And he narrated to us how he admired and understood the significance of the clothing that the Gaddi shepherds wear. What they have is a long choga, and this loose garment has very, very deep pockets and a belt. Now, what they'd use this pocket for is to keep the newborn lambs very warm and comfortable in this pocket, which is called a cook, which is also the local word for the womb. So the pocket and the womb and the nurture of the baby lambs is something which is indigenous to this culture. And Gulzarda was very struck by this unity of natural thinking, of environment, of preservation of life, the human body, and the clothing. This was one side of his experience. The other side was when he met a Gaddi family in Bharmor and other local people. One of them asked a little girl, child of about 5 or 6, in that community hut to dance and told Gulzarda that, see, she can dance to the music that you have set. And the lyric was Kajrare, Kajrare. And Gulzarda, instead of being pleased about this, was actually very distraught. And he told us later that I think I have muddied the waters of the Ravi. So those were the kind of experiences that we brought away. So I would want Prem, of course, to talk about her experiences. But one point I want to make, what was the mythology that we found there? I'm deeply interested in mythology, as you know. This was the story of Sunaina Devi. And this is where my gender lens comes very strongly into play. The capital of Chamba, that whole district, was to move from Bharmor to Chamba city, the new city of Chamba that had been laid out along the banks of the Ravi. But when the people moved there, they found that there was no water flowing through the rivulets. And without that water supply, the city could not be populated. And then the king had a dream which said that the river wants the sacrifice of a human being so that water may be released. And Queen Sunena told her husband, the king, that she wanted to sacrifice herself for the cause of the city. And though there was a lot of tragic wailing associated with this decision, she explained it by saying that if she gave up her life, then through the son of the king and others, the unbroken legacy of the Chamba kings would continue. But if one of the children, the son particularly, were to be sacrificed, then the lineage would be broken. And in the lyrics of the Chamba region, Sunena Devi is celebrated over and over and over again for having made that sacrifice. And the song mentions how she and her handmaidens, they all stood with their feet in the water and they prayed to the river god to bring prosperity and water to the community. And gradually they kept getting submerged. And there were two last wishes that she said. She said, save my anklets for my daughter and bring my baby son for a last feed on my milk. So that is the kind of sentiments. Now, I know today that we question these sacrifices that women made, the so-called larger good of the community. And of course, these debates must happen. But my question really for people with gender interest is, can we revisit the past? Can we really revisit Sunena Devi's choices or Padmini of Chittor's choices? These are choices made within a cultural milieu in a certain time. But certainly in Punjab and in other such locations, the community is very, very important. These are not individualistic people who only think about themselves and their own success. Prem, would you agree? Over to you.
Right. Absolutely, Professor Lal. Thanks for, kind of literally, uh, flagging out the first thread of the memorabilia that one has of Chamba and Bharmor. I'll just take it forward from here and would like to only tell the audience that actually this research is on the Gaddi tribe, of the northern Himalayas in the Chamba and the Bharmor region. Though in that book, I have two chapters and two narratives on, you'll be surprised to know that within the Gaddi tribe also there is the Brahmin Gaddi and there's the Rajput Gaddi and there are several others, there's a kind of a hierarchy. And I looked at two, but this project experience, because it, kind of panned out continued for more than 3 years, we were into, all aspects of this project, we split into two teams. One team at Chamba and the other team that, moved on to Bharmor. As Professor Lal said, this was, a village, a kind of actually a town village. Earlier it was a village, but now a kind of a town, around 60 kilometers from Chamba, and it was in a more difficult terrain. Chamba is a more advanced and a modern city now, but this was more difficult terrain, and we moved on and of course met and spent a lot of time there. And so, as I said, this project is about the Gaddis of the northern Himalayas, and there's this prevalence of the transhuman practice of the Gaddi men traveling uphill towards the Mani Mahesh temple of Shiva in summer and descending to their village home only in winter, right? And they lead a very harsh life, and the women are equally affected, and they also lead a very difficult life because they take up the responsibility of homemaking, family nurture, and agriculture activity, if particularly the time when the men are away, and the living conditions are extremely minimalistic. The food resources are absolutely weather dependent, and the climate is, as we all know, for 6 months at least, it's blisteringly cold. Let me, kind of just after this very, very initial, disclosures about this very little research there was, at least till that time, with the time that we all started researching, 2008 to 2011, and actually the book came out in 2012. So it was, and this is what I always tell my younger researchers and research scholars, that good research can never happen in a span of, say, 3 months or 6 months. It has to grow. It has to grow in you. You have to live with that research, and you have to continue with that research. Sometimes you have to maintain a bit of a distance from that research only to then gather, greater insights into that research. So this is exactly what happened with us. So I just want to kind of, just acquaint the audience with a couple of more details, like that there wasn't, good research available in English from India on, in this area. And Professor Lal would agree with me here, because she is the one who, kind of led us to a whole lot of these kinds of, she and Sukrita led us to a whole lot of these. And I'm talking about 12 years back, so I was much younger, not so young, but still, a scholar in her early 40s. So, we learned a lot. So, most of this research came from non-Indian, people, Britishers, for example, Philip Vogel and others. And the second thing was that there's a whole lot of research in this region on the Gaddi tribe and on these, mythological stories was in Hindi. Keshav Chand, O.C. Handa, and we did try to dig into the Western academic research of Prof and of Barth's mythologies, but we realized that we have to somewhere do something and contribute to the significant repertoire, which should be in English. We were all, of course, English scholars. So we dug into, some research which was available, and that was also not too much, by Mahesh Sharma and O.C. Handa and others. So we, with just these preliminary, research centric ideas, I just thought I will kind of talk about some of the takeaways from this, great experience, which was, in the beautiful and the pristine environment of the Himalayas. And a lot of discussions happened in that beautiful IIAS with Gulzar Saab and with several other scholars, like Professor Lal would remember and would recall, and they are her friends, Usha Bande, Professor Usha Patania. And then we dug, when we got scholars like him, Chatterjee, and several others, who were on board, and we had these fantastic, sessions. So the takeaways from, as she mentioned, we have documented orature or oral histories of women, and in particular we chose elder women, because they are the repositories of a culture, and their narratives are soon to disappear narratives. They are kind of, we use the word dying narratives, because these narratives, if not documented, if not preserved, would kind of, so in many ways, we kind of became archaeologists, we kind of became preservers of a culture, the entire team. So, I would just like to maybe foreground a couple of other things, like, in my own, and I was never alone, when I say my, I mean the entire team. And, I was with several other faculty members from Delhi University, and, as I said, of other universities. So what did we finally, do? We documented their voices, their memory, their cultural memory. And what we encountered was was cultural amnesia. The most interesting and a little poignant part of this entire story was, and we must have met at least, as I said, all of us met everybody, so many women, more than, I don't know, 15, 20 older women, and from all strata of the society and of people, but, primarily the Gaddis, of that region, So, everybody, all of them said, we don't remember much. We had also interpreters. We reached Bharmor, and in Chamba, we had student interpreters who knew the local language also. Here, the issue was transference and translation from the local to maybe Hindi, so in Kangri or Pahari language to Hindi and then to English. Right. So we had these students with us who were familiar with the whole lot of that culture and those women. So, as I said, most of them said, and this is, when we later theorized, and Professor Lal would remember how Sheila Robatnam came in, and, we spoke about women hidden from history. Right? These are women hidden from history, that is why it became a very passionate project. We were all, our hearts were involved in the project. We all wanted to really document, as I said, these soon to disappear narratives, right? So each one of them, and this is so typically women. And here I'd like to just kind of bring in Temsula Ao, who says that women do not never kind of speak too much about themselves. They like to hide things, right? And I'd like to also bring in a researcher that I met at UBC Canada, and I brought her to one of the conferences that I organized in Delhi University, Julie Cruikshank, who in her, she's a very, very famous cultural anthropologist. In her social life of stories, she says that, the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee is very important, because finally what we read and what we hear is the interviewer's version. Right. So she says there's a very, very, delicate balance that needs to be maintained. So, armed with a whole lot of all, kind of theoretical ammunition, but a very, very relevant ammunition, we try to then deconstruct the narratives. We did not meet them once or twice. We met all these women, and I can just take names: Kinno Devi, Pulo Devi, so many of them. And I'm going to show a glimpse of some of the recordings that we had made, if time permits and the organizers feel it's fine. I'd like to kind of share just one little glimpse of that, maybe after kind of I finish speaking, or maybe if Professor Lal would also like to kind of, she's so full of it. I know that she might just want to add on to what I say. So as I said, that most of them said that they don't remember anything. We said, do you remember anything about their customs, about, how did you get married? What were the rituals at that time? Or, how is your relationship with your husband, with the man, with men in your life? How do you treat, the sons of the family? These are very important questions for, the rites of passage questions, and lots of them, So, when we asked all these questions, most of them right at the outset said they don't remember anything. They don't remember any songs. They don't remember any incident. They don't remember. They were very, they were very wary of speaking. So actually, the takeaway is from this kind of a project that the untold really got spoken. We met them several times, and gradually, they came out and spoke about several things. I think all of you should pick up this book and read, because it has many, many narratives, but the untold definitely got told in this entire, research journey. We came to know about their practices. We came to know how they were always so unsure about their men, when the men went up to Lahore and Spiti region, and took the, the cattle and, sheep and, with them, and they were away for six months. Several of them, and this is also true, that several of them had maybe a second home there. They, sometimes they had a second woman there. So most of these women were so unsure of, their, kind of their, not their self, their subject position, and what they said, I think we just gave them a little bit of agency, and we did tell them that this is all getting documented and this might be published. It was all with permission, and it was all done in a very, very professional manner, thanks to, again, the leaders of the project, Professor Lal and Sukrita Paul Kumar. But so this for me, I think the documenting these oral narratives of the Himalayan region and getting to know this region, getting to know the people of this region, getting to know their cultural practices. And Professor Lal spoke of one of them, and that is the mythology around this region, their association with religion, with rituals. All of it was an extremely enriching experience. And what was also very interesting was that regionality and trans-regionality coexisted, and this was again another takeaway. In most of the creative expressions, we all Punjabis know about the Galis, the UP people, we all in the north know about the Galis, which very often, form the base of initial marriage rituals and marriage songs. And we discovered that these women also, sang, and I'm going to then later on, kind of play after Professor Lal has spoken, one of them, that they also had these songs, and they also, and gradually, as I said, in the second or the third visit, and this is one village in Rajour where we had to really climb up, and it was a difficult climb. But today I can, in retrospect, say it was such a beautiful experience. We all trudged up and went up to meet, and this house of this Kaddi woman was, like a presiding deity, looking, in the down to the Bharmor valley, and the house, she kind of opened up and sang songs with us. So I think this is, as I said, they resonate, so well there. This culture also resonates so very well with some of the cultures that we are more familiar with, one can just kind of go on and on and on, but I would like Professor Lal to come in here and to speak a little more about, if time permits. Sangeeta, Anu, can we continue for maybe another, just maybe few minutes? Please let us know. But Professor Lal, yes, you can.
Well, I think we do have time for concluding remarks. We can just tie up all the threads in
maybe
a few minutes.
after Professor Lal has spoken, I'd just kind of share a couple of clips with the audience. Yeah. Unmute yourself, Professor Lal. Unmute yourself. Organizers, please unmute Professor Lal. I think I can see her. She's muted.
So, Prem, thank you very much for the reminder of, as you said, a very passionately involved research project that we did. And my takeaway from this, and as a concluding remarks, is the Himalayas are a very complex region. And how much energy, time, and resources do we have to undertake these kinds of minute but absolutely important micro studies as we did in Chamba? So this was a kind of a trailblazer, if one may put it, but it's not easy to find the resources for undertaking this. One of the things I do want to mention is that religion and spiritual practices are very important in the Himalayas. We also did a short documentary on what is called a cheli, that is a woman who is possessed by some kind of a divine presence that enters her. And this is common in many parts of the Himalayas. But our experience was in the outreaches of Bharmor into an even tinier village. This was a woman who was a soothsayer or had the reputation. And we come with a certain kind of urban skepticism, which was banished once we saw what was done. This woman came into what they say, ki bhar aa gaya. And then she called upon the divine to enter her, and her demeanor completely changed. She had a dupatta, so she was looking different. Her voice changed, her body movement changed. This small, diminutive woman who suddenly had an outburst of energy. And after this phase was over, which is completely documented in our film, she just came out of it as though nothing had happened to her. And when one of our researchers asked her, Ki aapne kuch dekha? She actually turned around and told us in a rather intimidating way, Kabhi dekha hai Kali ka roop. So the whole idea of belief and non-belief has to be looked at differently when one goes to the Himalayas. I was also at one time interested in the work of Verrier Elwin because of the anthropological information that he brings to us, particularly about the Naga tribes. Indira Goswami from Assam, a colleague in Delhi University, was also a very dear friend. She was interested in such practices from the Kamakhya temple, which is deeply associated as a Shakti Pitha, particularly significant for women. So, time and time again, the Himalayas have come to my imagination and understanding as a place of deep cultural complexities. And as Prem mentioned, some of us are from the cities are ill-equipped to enter these communities. We must be utterly, utterly humble about our lack of knowledge when we go into these communities. And our willingness to learn is what is going to open up the knowledge of these communities so that we become better researchers, better feminists, better scholars, better intellectuals. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thanks. So towards the end, I would only like to bring to you two things. A, of course, as I said, I just like to show the little clip of this Gaddi woman, you know, how she kind of opened up and started kind of singing with us. And this is a very, very short clip. And the other is, you know, my later interest, you know, of course, I'm sure it comes from my, you know, initial, you know, interest and of course affiliation and association with modern religious movements, you know, and the concept, you know, and spirituality, you know, and since, you know, I'm also in some ways an environmentalist or an, you know, at least an ecology sympathizer. So, you know, and the research that we did, you know, and again, it is Professor Lal's under the stewardship of her, you know, when she was the research chairperson of the Research Council at Delhi University, that this fantastic scheme of innovative projects, you know, where to student faculty partnership in colleges, that was initiated. You know, we at Delhi University have to always remember that colleges are often given a bit of a stepmotherly treatment, a kind of a short shrift when it comes to research projects, because research projects most of the times go to departments and department colleagues. So here was this scheme, and you know, I with and you know, we, some of you are here, I know Soumya is here and Pratibha is here. So we all embarked on this project on spiritual ecology, and the takeaway was, of course, this very fantastic book that we brought out. But you know, my interest in that, you know, interestingly also comes from the Himalayas, you know, in the sense that all of us are familiar with the Chipko movement, with Bahuganas, and you know, with the fact that how women, actually it was women, you know, who to protect ecology, to protect the trees, the felling of trees, and I don't want to really give a huge detailed account of the Chipko movement, but the takeaway from that was, you know, a little research on ecofeminism that I conducted on Plantri. You know, this is a village in Rajsamand district of Rajasthan, where, and you know, I'll quickly show some pictures, but where, you know, the village Sarpanch led a drive that with for every girl child born in that village, a certain number of trees would be planted in that village. And today I'm going to show the picture of Plantri. It is such a beautiful and a word fantastic green village, if I can say. And this is the Chipko movement is in many ways a resistant movement, and this also led to several resistant, movements like the Narbada and Bachao and several others. And I just give you a glimpse of the oral, resistant culture that came from, and I feel that yes, the Chipko movement in 1978 was responsible for these kinds of resistant orature that came. So a glimpse of that. And with that, I end with these glimpses. I end, and let me, at this juncture, take again thank Professor Lal for coming in and for enriching, I'm sure, this session and the entire, hopefully the entire conference, our conversation. I hope it is kind of a takeoff point. I hope it is a significant signpost for other sessions to and other speakers to come in. So with this, I end, and let me now share the screen and show you a couple of these, vignettes. Right, I shared the screen now. Yeah.
सस बोलन नहीं देंदी नहीं सस सोना नहीं देंदी सोन नहीं देंदी छाड़ घोड़े दी परे दी फूनी दी सस नहीं बोलदी घोड़े वारी नैना निंदरे वारे मेरा मन बोलंदा
Can you hear please everyone?
पलगड़ी सोये सस मिठ बोलने कंदा नैना कलियारी कंदा नैना निंदरे वारे किया सोये सस के ना सुकले मिठ बोलनी बल्ले बल्ले बोलन दिया होगी ते नानंद बड़ी कलियारी कंगली अच्छा की सोना फेरे Nanda saore.
So this was a kind of a gali, and maybe, you can just have a look at the translation. Neither does my sass talk to me, nor does she allow me to sleep. I want to sleep, even if it is for a short while. My sass talks sweetly, but my nanad has a sharp tongue. She does not let me sleep even for a short while. How do I sleep? I will sleep when my nanad will go to her sasural and sass will go to her maike. Then I will sleep in peace. I want to sleep, even if it is for a short while. We all know that new brides are all very, very sleep deprived all the time. So this is a song, which this beautiful Gaddi woman sang for us. This is, P. Plantri. Have a look at this, beautiful village. This is the sarpanch of that village who led this, drive, and he has, of course, a bit of a history. He, both the husband and wife took a long time in becoming parents. And once he had his first child, girl child, he decided to just plant trees and trees. And with that, it became a practice in that village that, they started planting trees whenever a girl child was born. And of course, this is a typical picture of also the Chipko movement, and this when girls own up trees and they're tying rakhis to the trees. I end with, as I said, resistant orature, which again is, I think, travel down from the Chipko movement of the Himalayas, right? So enjoy this last bit. And with this, I also thank the organizers for organizing this event and talk and bringing me in, and with that, bringing Professor Lal in. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Sangeeta Anu.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Absolutely engrossing and scintillating conversation. Thank you so much, Professor Lal, and thank you so much, Dr. Srivastava.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So just to summarize it, please let me go over it a little bit slowly because there's quite a bit. So Professor Lal has very rightfully reminded us that the Himalayan roof is a large roof, and we all must inhabit some tiny little roles in this complex and fragile roof. The Himalayan literary odyssey cannot but have an episode and Tagore. The influence of the Himalayas on the life and writings of Rabindranath Tagore and his almost Wordsworthian relationship with Kumaon and Almora was so very well described by Professor Lal. The inspirational quality of the Himalayas and the intercultural links between Santiniketan and Kumaoni writers has given us a lot of food for thought. The next episode from IIAS in Simla opens window to the cosmopolitan culture in Shimla, the Himalayan Brahmo Samaj and its association with Keshab Sen and the Punjab missionaries. Once again, the syncretic cultures come to the fore. You pointed out how conjoining of nature, human and spiritual happens in a very unique way in the mountainous cultures. The third episode takes us to Chamba. The protagonist here is the indigenous culture. We enjoyed Gulzar Saab's appreciation and assimilation of this culture. The story of Sunaina Devi brings out the eco-critical as well as feminist debates around the intervention of women in environmental preservation. Thanks, Prem, for steering the conversation so deftly and passionately into these 3 episodes. Of course, this has been made possible due to your scholarly and personal rapport with Professor Lal. I was enthralled to hear your narration of the Gaddi culture, and you are so very right in emphasizing the rigors of meaningful research, and I hope this webinar shall open space for the same. We are indebted to the dedicated researchers and writers like you and Professor Lal, who are at great pains, and Mr. Tsundue, who are at such great pains to conserve these told and untold cultures. Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sangeeta. Thank you, Prem.
Now I think it is time for the interaction. The question answer sessions, and we are flooded, in fact, with questions, not unexpected, quite a few of them, in fact. If you'll allow me, so then I would address the first set of questions to Mr. Tsundue. Mr. Tsundue, as you must have seen that there are quite a few questions, which are there for you. The first question says, do you agree that environmental nationalism has become an integral part of the larger Tibetan nationalist discourse? Mr. Tsundue?
Sangeeta?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think Tsundue is not with us right now. So
okay.
Go
no
to
issue, no issue.
Lal and Dr. Srivastava.
We would be, we would like to have him back here if there are not any personal or technological constraints for him. So please do send a message so that we can carry out this interaction. But let us begin then, with the other set of questions. Professor Lal, the question says that, would you like to share any special recollections of your experience of the Himalayas in the terms of your writing of the law of the threshold?
Thank you for reminding me of that early book, which was also written during a fellowship in the hills. So the first association with the Himalayas is the composition of the book itself. But there are many writers there, Anita Desai in particular, who was deeply connected with the hills. And so the idea of the threshold, and I think when Prem played that clip about the Gaddi woman and the translation of the song, have we really moved? Isn't the threshold still a very important marker between the private and the public domain in which women shift? So the Himalayan story is a larger Indian story, is what I would say.
Definitely. There is another query for you, Professor Lal. How does one acquire the critical fine balance in ethnographic research without imposing one's own personalities? And is that important?
It is indeed a very important question. And there are some theoreticians, Joan Sanger in particular, who's written about this. And also Prem gestured towards that actually the interviewer as well as the subject both have agency, and it's very difficult to balance the two agencies. So correctly speaking, the interviewer should get the permission of the interviewee and only then go ahead with that research result. But what happens, as we also found in Bharmor and Chamba, that there is a language barrier in India, particularly in the Himalayan regions, but maybe elsewhere too. So ethnographic research has to be very, very careful, particularly when we are looking at gender-based research, not be patronizing towards the interviewee. And therefore, one should be completely humble about the role one has as a transmitter and not necessarily an interpreter of that experience.
Ma'am, you have a whole bunch of fanboys and fangirls, in this audience. And of course, they are remembering you as their teacher and mentor. But alongside of this, they have this question for you. What brought you here to be a part of the Himalayas project, and what has generally been the source of your interest, in the Himalayas?
The interest in the Himalayas is an ongoing one, and good friends like Prem know about this. So when she called me and told me about the conference and asked me to be a part, I was delighted. And of course, I know you and Anu and many others very well. And Maharaja Agrasen College has been very close to me for many years. So altogether, the Himalayas and all of you are very good reason for me to be here.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We have all cherished, in fact, this valuable relationship. And I believe this is a question, the last question here for you, I think. Many of the activists work on protecting the culture and promoting different tribes and religion. Doesn't that trigger some caste groups and religion when a specific group or religion is promoted? Please share your views on that.
It's a very fine balance that we are treading. And in India, it is indeed a challenge how to preserve the integrity of a culture, particularly that of isolated communities, and yet to have enough information and understanding to have a humanitarian link. And this issue is particular to the outlying isolated regions, and Himalayas have a very large number of such regions because in the plains, there is more migration, more integration, but remote islands, as in the Andamans or the remote hill areas, become very difficult for access. And the lack of access has created both isolated communities and also very insular communities. And at the same time, the integration and understanding across cultures is important. So I think it is methodology which is important for scholars to keep in mind when going in for any kind of ethnographic research. And we have very good examples like Anvita Abhi, for instance, who has shown the success and the possibilities of doing the research and not underestimating the people and the culture and not pigeonholing them in any kind of a misunderstood kind of a way. So methodology, I would say, is important.
Thank you so much. Let me just take a few questions for Prem. Prem, there's one question for you which says, your observations on the specificities of the emotional onslaught of the peregrinating lifestyle of the Gaddi tribes, the peregrinating lifestyle of the Gaddi tribes.
You know what, I will not like to kind of use, or I'm not very happy with the word onslaught. It was a very reciprocal kind of an exchange that we had, with the Gati women. It wasn't as if we were subjected to a kind of a trauma, or and I'd just like to also add on a little to what Professor Al has already said about ethnographic research, and particularly when it deals with women, that there is, and researchers have spoken about it, that the concept of selective memory, that very often, they tell what they wish to tell. Memory also has this very funny games that it plays with us, and we tend to pick and choose what to tell and what not to tell. So it was very, it was emotional, yes. But maybe I'm also that kind of a scholar, that I do tend to, though of course the head is always right there, ruling the heart, but often, and I feel good research comes out of a kind of an involvement when you involve yourself, in every which way. And that is why, right at the beginning I said, but when it comes to Tagore, Professor Lal's interest in Tagore is not just a literary kind of interest. She's also kind of, emotionally connected to Tagore. So, so this emotional, if I can use the word onslaught, was, a kind of a very reciprocal kind of exchange. Right.
Prem, this is a rather long worded question, but I believe the gist of the next question says that would you like to comment on the importance of the oral narratives on movements like the Chipko movement?
I think the importance of oral narratives, they just cannot in any which way, undermined, not just on the Chipko movement, but generally on the written word. Basically, all written literature comes from the oral traditions. And I'm so very happy that over the last 15-20 years, we, and of course that is a kind of response also to post-coloniality and the way that we have been kind of doing post-colonial studies, the way we are trying to write back to the center, if I can use Bill Ashcroft and Griffith's, kind of term. But so it cannot at all be undermined. And the moment we enter the interiors, and I've had the good fortune of visiting and meeting the First Nations of Canada and the Native Americans of America, and within India also, one had, and one I was in a project with Professor Anvita B. Professor Lal just mentioned her at Port Blair, and of course this the Gaddi tribes here and the Beggars. I've also been to Madhya Pradesh and been interacted with the Beggars. So the oral tradition is so very rich, and it is, I think, so very vibrant, and it is so very local. So if in the entire discourse of globalization that we it has a very this the local has a very important place, and the oral contributes a lot to this local. So I don't think it can at all be undermined, be it the Chipko movement, or you just had a glimpse of the Jal Satyagrah that and the little clip that I showed you from, it has come out of that region, the Narmada Dam region, and it speaks of, all such distresses, traumas, and cultures which are being eroded by the so-called development project. And I remember, meeting up to Linda Tuhiwai Smith. She's a Maori scholar, and she also happens to be she was in 2010 the vice chancellor of the first tribal university of this world in New Zealand, the Maori University. She says that development has to go on, and they don't need to be two silos, development and whatever is happening when it comes to the indigenous population and indigenous growth and indigenous kind of development. They don't need to be at loggerheads, but she says it has to be constructive development. So we all are so very familiar with, when the hydropower dam on Satluj was being built by this massive public sector company called NJPC, Nathpa Jhakri Power Corporation. I remember the kind of, movements that, the locals had, and, they arrived at a very important, they are project affected people, PAPs. In government terminology, these people are called PAPs, project affected people. But they were really looked after. But I am privy to that because I'm little familiar with that entire big project. So they were, It's not just in kind, in material or in economic terms that you take care of these people. It is also, having a kind of a sympathetic attitude towards their culture and their past. So sometimes, agencies and government agencies do it, sometimes they don't do it, but this is where, the importance of orature and orality and oral culture comes in. I think very, very, very important to all such resistant movements like Chipko and others.
Thank you so much, Prem. We are waiting for Mr. Tsundue to join. I believe there are some technological issues because he's been trying to join but has not been able to join back again. But we have not given up, in the sense that we do have a few formalities to still perform. Hopefully, if he joins back, then we are going to take up those questions. And if in case he is not able to, we would not like to disappoint the attendees in any way. Those questions are going to be mailed or WhatsApp to him, so that the responses, from Mr. Tsundue may be received for the attendees. So let us see how it pans out. I would like to now perform my last duty as chair to sum up the entire session before I invite Dr. Neeraj Kumar Singh to deliver the vote of thanks to complete the proceedings for the inaugural session today. So I do think we have made a very relevant and a pertinent beginning. The entire culture scape has opened up with forays into the literary, geographical, political, and spiritual arenas enshrined in the mighty Himalayas. All four speakers, Namita, Mr. Tsundue, Professor Lal, Dr. Srivastava, have had very deep connections with these mountains and have paved way for the cultural geography and psychogeography of the mountains to be further explored in the rest of the 8 sessions of the conference. We pay tribute to the inspirational, syncretic, spiritual, and literary quality of Himalayan mountainous culture, which is at the same time fraught with fragility, politics, and dislocation. Thank you all. Thank you once again. And now I invite Dr. Neeraj Kumar Singh.
Madam, Mr. Tsundue is here.
Okay, great. Mr. Tsundue, we were waiting for you. There's a list of questions which I would like to address to you. Should I begin? Should I begin? Am I audible, Mr. Tsundue?
Sangeeta, can I just make one little intervention?
Sure.
I've just come to know that Sukrita Paul Kumar is very much in this, in the audience. I would like to, make this very, very, actually thank her for this wonderful project. And she was very much, one of the leaders of the team with Professor Lal. So I'm so glad that she is here in this conference and listening to, must have listened to the conversation and must have gone back down in the memory lane, and revisited.
She can unmute herself.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Sukrita, would you like to say something?
Dr. Sukrita, welcome. I do know that you are a trio or perhaps a part of a larger group of researchers and very interested in this area. If you would like to deliver a small note, most welcome. Prem, please check with her. Anu, so Mr. Tsundue is ready for the questions?
Right. Sangeeta, could I take a moment here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So it's not really customary for me to sort of speak in the middle of this whole process as it is. But Professor Lal and Prem, thank you so much for this absolutely fantastic masterclass. Thank you so very much indeed. Thank you for taking the questions. I had 2 or 3 questions there, which you graciously answered. So thank you so much for everything today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anu. A pleasure for us and always for you.
Thanks, Prem.
Mr. Tsundue may please unmute himself. I think that's a weak connection because he seems to be there and not there.
Hi,
Yeah,
you hear me? I'm here. Yeah.
Great, good. Because there are quite a few questions and we did not want to miss this opportunity. Wonderful that you've joined back. The first question says, do you agree that environmental nationalism has become an integral part of the large Tibetan nationalist discourse?
Yes. Any particular questions?
Repeat the question.
Yes.
Do you agree that environmental nationalism has become an integral part of the larger Tibetan nationalist discourse?
My connection is poor, so I'm hearing only half of what you're saying.
You can
I
check
heard
the
only
questions.
last bit where you said national discourse.
You can check the questions on your WhatsApp, the group that we have formed.
What? Sure.
You can check the questions. The questions are posted there.
Okay. Yes, I got one. I'm seeing one question from Anupama. She's saying a request to share one of his poems on his relationship with Tibet.
That is the one big request.
Okay. Then there are. So is Tibetan culture related to Himalayas? If yes, you can please explain how. There are many questions. Do you agree that environment nationalism has become an integral part of the larger Tibetan national discourse? Can you please tell us more about your work in My Kind of Exile and why is Tibet called Roof of the World? Please do share some tourist places to know best about this culture as per your experience. Do you agree environmental nationalism is becoming okay? So there are a couple of questions I'd like to just generally respond to all, perhaps one by one. Most importantly, when we say Tibetan culture, we are talking not just about Tibet, the country, because the Tibetan culture, just as we say Indian culture, it goes into Bangladesh, goes into Nepal and Bhutan, goes into Pakistan, right up to Afghanistan. Yeah. Similarly, reverse effects in different other countries. And when we talk about Tibet, we are talking about spread of Tibetan scholarship in Buddhism right across to China and also to Mongolia. And the Buddhism that we learned from India and how it had been spread and shared and had reverse effects in India, even today with the presence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama here in India, and he championing the what he calls the ancient Indian wisdom all across the world. Today there are almost about 300 to 400 Buddhist centers around the world, mainly following His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So what had originated from Bodh Gaya has come to Tibet and now is spread around the world. So when we say Tibet, it's not just the geographical location of Tibetan Plateau. And geographically speaking, Tibetan Plateau, when we talk about it, it's not just the land beyond the Himalayas, which is Tibetan Plateau, but all throughout the Himalayas. So Tibet and Himalayas are inseparable. They are one and the same in terms of cultures, especially the linguistic aspects. When you go to Ladakh, for example, now there is Ladakhi nationalism where they speak Bhoti language, and they ride. So that is essentially Tibetan, but it has been it has found its own unique identity in Ladakh, Lahore, Spiti, and also partly in Kinnaur. Then, if we come to northern regions of Uttarakhand, both in Garhwal and also in Kumaon, there are many aspects of Tibetan religion and culture, and all across the Himalayas. Traditionally, people in the Himalayas have always traded with the Tibetans across the Himalayas, and there are marriages, there are trades, there are people who settled on either sides, as if there was no border in the Himalayas. It was like that before Chinese invasion of Tibet, and that has caused perhaps the biggest disruption in the Himalayan culture. I have written about the exile experience and also identity, and finding the new Tibetan identity based on the political movement that has shaped the Tibetan sensibility, and also about um, the literature and cultures that we are talking about. You know, although I'm born in India, educated here, I've been to Tibet, but my going to Tibet was not a tourist effort. I secretly sneaked into Tibet from Ladakh region, went to so many different places, but then got arrested. I was jailed in Tibet for 3 months, and finally I was thrown out of Tibet by the Chinese. They were saying that I had come there for the freedom of Tibet, and they were saying this is separatism, separating Tibet from China. So such kind of accusations, but it was truly China who had invaded Tibet and separated Tibet from the Himalayas. So therefore, today the borders that we see in the Himalayas is truly the biggest dividing force that we see in the Himalayas. I've written about the situation inside Tibet extensively in essays and stories. Um, and I've written poems that are set in Bombay, Chennai, Karnataka, also in Dharamchala, and different parts of India where I travel and speak about Tibet. Um, and then last two questions, what is the fascinating fact about Tibetan culture that attracts so many people there? I think, there, did you mean inside Tibet, or did you mean all across the Himalayas? Or also, and also because there is a fascination of the Tibetan culture, particularly in the West, I think, and therefore the Western imagination of Tibet and calling Tibet Shangri-La or Shambhala, or the country where people never died and people live healthy and forever. You know, that kind of imagination was kind of exoticization of certain aspects of Tibetan culture, which was mainly, nirvana-seeking Tibetan Buddhist culture, where they always thought that people were never in contradiction or conflict, and they thought that Tibetan Buddhists were able to meditate and find such kind of harmony from within, and which seemed to be giving them a longer life and more harmonious life. But all these are, said and written, imagined out of fascination. But then I think what the Tibetans have found is how this Tibetan empire, which was one of the biggest empires in Central Asia between 7th to 9th century, today is an empire mostly spiritual in nature. And yet today, under Chinese occupation, the 2.5 million square kilometer of land, Tibetans are still there, robustly living their own life, and living the Tibetan life itself has become the sense of maintaining the identity, and also passive resistance, but a rigorous one. So I think that the culture that is based on compassion and non-violence, however, exotic it may sound, but I think aspiration has always been this, and that too led by His Holiness the Dalai Lama when we are undergoing the most difficult time. So I think these are the aspects that we are talking about when we talk about Tibetan religion and culture. And this aspect you will see all across the Himalayas, from Ladakh to Arunachal. And if there's any other question, then perhaps we can discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Sundu. I think these are the questions, which the audience, in fact, has addressed to you. And definitely, we all know you, and we've heard you, as the ambassador of Tibetan culture, and all the conflicts, and pain even, that this comes with today. So it certainly has raised our awareness, of the inseparable nature, in fact, of the Tibetan culture with the Himalayas. And I think that's a very valuable takeaway from your talk, as well as
Thank you so much. I'm traveling. Yeah,
I know we
I'm
can see
standing now at at, yeah, I'm standing now at the railway platform. It's a metro railway platform. I'm now heading towards Mysore from Bangalore. So
okay,
I'm
all the
grateful
best.
to all of you who have got me into this, and I'm really happy that I was able to respond to some of the questions. Thank you very much, and once again I praise your effort in bringing this focus on the Himalayan culture. And definitely, if I can do anything in putting you in touch with some of the scholars, native speakers, important personalities in the Himalayas, I'm most happy to do that in future. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All the best for your journey and being a part of our journey. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sundu.
So with this, now I invite Dr. Neeraj Kumar Singh to formally end the session with his vote of thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the conference committee of InSearch, I feel privileged to propose a formal vote of thanks for the inaugural session, which is graced by such eminent personalities. But before that, I also stand here to tell you the story behind the organization of such a conference under the aegis of InSearch. Although a lot has been said about InSearch by Dr. Sangeeta and Dr. Anu, but I thought that I will also try to elaborate a little bit about it. We have been organizing conferences on biodiversity and climate change from 2013 to 2018, and its inception of with the inception of InSearch, and we had been doing that, but we found that it was not enough. And one fine day, when we were all chatting at the end of the 6th National Conference, we found that it was not enough, and so we should move a little forward. So, committed to the cause of conservation and preservation of natural and cultural heritage, we thought in terms of moving out from our cozy confines and undertake activities outdoors, community outreach programs like promoting self-help groups, sustainable farming techniques, using indigenous techniques for water conservation and rainwater harvesting. However, such activities required structured approach, a lot of flexibility in planning and implementation, and an institutional mechanism to support it. Thus, InSearch was born as a registered non-profit volunteer organization of academicians, researchers, and students from a variety of disciplines. And through its 3 centers, we have, in fact, InSearch has got 3 centers: the Ideation Center, the Center for Community Outreach Programs, and Publication Center. InSearch has been making rapid strides through organization of conferences under the broad theme of natural and cultural ecosystems, community work in 2 adopted villages, Zorasi in Hardwar district of Uttarakhand and Baroji in Nuh district of Haryana, and bringing out its online quarterly journal, IJDUS, Interdisciplinary Journal of Digital, Ubiquitous and Situated Learning. In future, we intend to take rural internship programs for students. We'll also continue with the theme of the cultural landscapes of the subcontinent for the conferences to include Indo-Gangetic Plains, coastal regions, Deccan and South Indian regions, and the desert ecosystems in future. The Ideation Center is in process of developing MOOCs on various themes for undergraduate studies. We hope that in the coming times, InSearch will explore new frontiers and make a meaningful contribution to human ecosystems. Now, coming to the formal vote of thanks, it is indeed a matter of great pride and privilege for me to do the honors. I'm highly indebted to the dignitaries of the inaugural session, Madam Namita Gokhale, Professor Malashri, Dr. Prem Srivastava, and Mr. Tenzin Tsundue, who have taken out their valuable time to be with us and share their experiences and thoughts. I'm sure your insight into the nuances of the great Himalayan landscape will inspire us in shaping our vision. I've had the privilege of interacting with many of the eminent experts who would be sharing their thoughts in the succeeding sessions spread over a period of 6 days. Dr. Fayad Khatsar, Dr. Raghu Chundawat, Dr. Kaustav Sharma, Dr. Nirmal Kumar, Mr. Sushil Bhoguna, Mr. Hridesh Joshi, and Dr. Govind Singh have been a part of our conferences on biodiversity and climate change and international webinar on COVID-19 pandemic in the past. I sincerely thank them for agreeing to be with us during this conference also. Other eminent speakers during the conference, Mr. Ashish Bhattacharya, Dr. Praveen Kumar, Mr. Mohan Singh, Dr. G.H. Mir, Ms. Joanna Van, Ms. Tanya Lal, Ms. Nikita Verma and Kshitij Agrawal, Ms. Purvi Sarkar, Salvat Hamra, Chongjing Ongmu, Ms. Malika Virdi, Ms. Sweta Dhiman, Ms. Bindu Gurtu, Ms. Mridula Sharma, Mr. Gaurav Kumar Pal, and Dr. Rakesh Kumar, who represent a variety of disciplines and who have given their long spans of time devoted to understanding the landscapes, cultures, and its people, are welcome to the conference. I'm delighted to inform that our colleagues from Maharaja Agrasen College, Dr. Anupama Jaydev, Dr. Charu Arya, Ms. Shilpa Gupta, Ms. Indrani Dasgupta, and Namita Deka are also here to share their thoughts and expertise with us. We have already heard Dr. Prem Srivastava. So on behalf of the conference committee, I extend a warm welcome to all of them. They are all our colleagues and we have been listening to them for quite some time now. I also take this opportunity to welcome our youngest speaker, Ms. Tanya Lal, who we have seen to grow up from a toddler to an architect and a design expert. We wish to hear from her in a day after tomorrow. In our past conferences have seen participation of experts and academia in large numbers, and every succeeding conference has been bigger than the previous ones. This conference has a total of 35 eminent speakers, and out of which around 16 are women. So women power actually has been at the forefront of this conference. Now, managing this huge number and curating various sessions during the conferences, during this conference has been made possible by a daring team of what we call the Dirty Dozen, Dr. Sangeeta Mittal, Dr. Amit Pundir, Dr. Geetika Jan Saxena, Dr. Anupama Jaydev, Ms. Shilpa Gupta, Dr. Vandana Soni, Dr. Natasha, Dr. Shirin B. Raina, Dr. Soumya Shukla, Dr. Pratibha Rai, Dr. Swami Nandan, and of course myself. I thank each one of them from the core of my heart for making it possible. Keep dreaming big, big, and bigger. One component that we have missed so much during this format of the conference is that our student volunteers who were always ready to take up challenges and learning organizational skills, they were not there. But fortunately, we were in a position to engage few first-year students this year too in this endeavor. The student team is led by Anika Kapoor, Sagar Jha, Abhinandani Sinha, Dhruv Rahal, Jivesh Malhotra, Yuvraj Singh, Ayush Raj, Khushi, Devrat, Vishal, and I commend them all for their understanding and hard work in putting up the show. Our past conferences, as well as the present ones, has seen wide participation from across the globe. I welcome all attendees and participants for this conference. And last but not the least, I thank our associates, IJDUS, Agrizen, Umang, Blackline Protections, RAS NGO, and IQAC DS College Katihar for their support in the organization of this conference. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Neeraj. Like I said, after Anu's presentation, all of it, the frenzy of it all starts making better sense, after these formal introductions and vote of thanks. Thank you so much. I would like to remind our attendees to kindly fill up the feedback form, the link for which has already been posted in the chat box. I'm very sure that all of you can access that. So that feedback form is important, as that is how we kind of manage your certification. So please do fill up the feedback forms. With this, we come to the end of this extremely riveting and extremely befitting inaugural session. I once again thank everyone for the time and patience. We did not encounter even a minor glitch thanks to the technology team, and also at the same time the very well behaved and the very patient and the very kind of, we can say, interested audience. I thank the audience with the core of my heart. Let us please switch on our cameras, and I will request Gitika to please do the needful for the group photograph for this session. Please let us switch on our cameras. Gitika, please click a group photograph for the session. Vandana, please. Okay, they can't. I believe it is taking a little bit of a time because the InSearch group needs to be made the co-host for them to be able to switch on their cameras. Gitika, are we ready? Soumya has switched on her camera, so has Vandana. I can't see Shirin.
Shireen ma'am is here.
Shirin, please switch on. Yeah, so I think that's it. Shilpa.
Shilpa, please switch on your camera.
Amit sir.
He's not here.
Shilpa. Okay, that's fine. Are we ready to click? Is it done? Thank you. Gitika, unmute.
It is done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with this, we come to the end of this session. We shall reconvene at 2 p.m. for the 2 p.m. session, the afternoon session in this series of sessions in the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye and all the best.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
See you again.
Thank you.
Shall I close the session?
I think we should.
Yeah.
Okay.
ठीक है.